Welcome to the Voice of MPE, the official podcast of Merchant Payments Ecosystem, Europe's largest merchant payments conference. Today, we are at the 16th Annual MPE Conference, MPE 2023. This podcast brings you interviews with payment industry leaders and professionals from the entire payment world. For more information, head over to www.merchantpaymentsecosystem.com. Today we are talking about emerging payment and fraud trends in gaming and gambling and how specialized digital-first acquirers are servicing online gaming. Claire Maslin, the CHYP moderator of this session, spoke with Brittany Allen from SIFT, Stephen Wynyard from SaltEdge, Armin Eigen from EMVCo, and Christian Reinheimer from Leo Vegas Gaming. Did you know that video game, iGaming, and gambling companies generate more money than movies and music combined? Listen to this episode to learn what the potential for payments is.
So let's start the panel with some brief introductions. My name is Claire Maslin and I'm CMO of Consult Hyperion, and we are consultants in secure electronic transactions. So Christian, if you could introduce yourself, please.
Sure thing. Christian, hi. I work at Leo Vegas. We are a gambling operator, internationally operating on multiple licenses. Please don't all, after this session, come up and try to sell something to me. It has been quite a hunt so far, so thanks for your appreciation.
Okay, Armin.
My name is Armin Eigen, and I'm the Director of Technology at EMVCo, a technical body that is basically providing the specifications for card payments, going all the way from the physical to the digital space.
Okay, Stephen.
Yeah, hi, good afternoon. My name is Steve Wynyard. I'm the CSO of SaltEdge. SaltEdge have been around for about a decade, and they are a open banking technology service provider. We do pretty much three things. We provide banks and EMIs with their PSD2 compliance. We work with a lot of senior partners, I guess, from banks to people like Finastra, etc., as their open banking provider to help with their clients. And we also provide open banking gateway services from payments to account information to a variety of merchants and fintechs and end users.
Thank you. Okay, so we've got really strong representation here from right the way across the ecosystem, different players coming from different perspectives. Christian, I'll start with you, if I may. Obviously, you are a provider of gaming and gambling. So first question, actually, let's unpick this a little bit. Gaming and gambling, are they the same? Do they face the same challenges?
Well, I can only speak for the gambling part here. Okay. I think the challenges that we face are somewhat unique. There's two reasons why people come to our product. A, they want to be entertained, and B, they want to win. So there's the payout part of the user journey that we have as a gambling operator, and obviously that's the one that the customers are most interested in. When you win, you want to access your winnings as soon as you can. So I think there, gambling is strongly different from other gaming, and the other part is that we are highly regulated. So every market in Europe, or almost every market, has their own legislation, and they're usually a bit different. So I think our space is a bit more compliant, more
complex. So from a user's perspective, I gamble. I don't personally gamble, but just supposing I gamble and I travel, and I want to gamble on the go. Does that impact from a regulatory perspective how your customer journeys work?
Well, that depends, right? I mean, if you travel out of the country, yeah, very much so. It's not that mobile, really. I mean, every market in Europe has their own legislation, and the regulatory requirements that we have, they start with how we can market our product to the customer. There's requirements on what we are supposed to do to sign up a customer to our product, and of course, how we are dealing with their money. So it's all the way, right? And you can't just sign up for our product. Let's say you live in UK, you sign up there, then the regulation is completely different from, let's say, Germany, right? So you couldn't really use our product in Germany if you're a signed up customer in the UK, even though we are the same company.
All right. Armin, from a standards perspective, obviously, Christian spoke purely about the gambling side of things. How from a gaming perspective, because this panel should cover both areas, from a gaming perspective, how difficult is it for you to delineate against the payment standards piece of things?
that's a very interesting way of looking at this, in the sense where in the gaming, the users or the gamers will be using non-traditional devices. So a lot of the authentication tools and the specifications that we have are browser-based usually. And in the gaming industry, it's going to be consoles and it's going to be mobile devices. And one of the issues that we had to look at was how can we prevent fraud without impacting the gaming experience by creating a complex payment step in the middle. So the fraud side is real. There was a 30% increase in fraud rates in gaming. And the challenge is also real, because when you are playing in your game, you don't want to be interrupted getting your phone out in order to have an action. So we had a lot of very interesting inputs from Microsoft and Sony that helped us actually increase the number of data elements that we're collecting from the gaming consoles directly. That provides confidence to the issuers so that we can provide a frictionless or seamless payment experience. And that we have delivered through the EMV 3D Secure strong customer authentication methodology that is also addressing the regulatory requirements that you have in Europe. And the results have been quite significant, as we hear from Microsoft and Sony, deployed both at scale and also increased the approval rates that they had on the payments did.
Okay, so that's the gaming part. So then from the gambling perspective.
So the gambling, it's the area where I go back to the technology, is that the gaming had a challenge related to the devices that were being used. In the gaming, I guess it's going to be mostly on the browser-based part. And this is where we would call out to the industry to give us inputs on what data elements they would require to strengthen the authentication without impacting the experience. And we received that also from the travel industry. So IATA gave us some data elements that would help them define the authentication of the purchase. And if we receive similar elements, we can update our specifications in order to address those data elements. So exchange of data. So we back at the bartering, right? I'll give you something, you give me something else.
Okay.
Yeah.
Christian, do you think from a standards perspective, there's enough to support providers? Are you working closely enough to be able to move this forward, to really reach the potential of this market?
I would say there could be more, not only between operators and providers, but also between the license authorities, but also the infrastructure providers. Let's face it, we are prone to money laundering in the way that we do business, because we do pay out customers. So we have to have a high awareness, and we need to do more than most likely your average e-commerce shop. That's fine. But to be able to accomplish that, everyone that is part of that ecosystem needs to, wanting to do the right thing. Yeah. And what we see is that sometimes we have gaming regulation coming up with requirements on us as the operator that make all the sense in the world, but that are technically not feasible for our providers or even the infrastructure that's underlying. And that obviously becomes a problem. And there's another thing that plays an important role here. I believe Dave said this morning that we should be careful asking our customers. I think what we're doing here is something that we that are professionals in this space understand. We all understand that a iGaming operator presents money flow in and out, and there's an elevated risk of money laundering. Right? When we introduce measures to prevent money laundering, what the customer sees is someone is preventing me to get my money. So there's an awareness piece that's also very important, right? Customers need to understand that this is not done for trying to steal money from them, to prevent them to get their money, but it's being done to keep the whole ecosystem safe. So it's a collaboration between the operators, the providers, the infrastructure providers, and the legislation itself. And of course, there's an awareness piece where we need to educate customers better.
Okay, so customer education in its current form, possibly not sufficient enough, and we're dealing with known entities and traditional payment methods. Stephen, when we look to some of the open banking things, does everyone on the street even understand this for normal transactions? Probably not. So what's your perspective on this?
No, that's a great question, Claire. We hear that a lot. No, I think open banking, it's funny. It's whilst it's two words, I think it's probably just the nerdy techs that get involved in sort of the finance world that probably understand it to a degree. But then, we can get involved in an open banking project that can end up being a 100-page technical document. It gets really deep and dirty. But I think from a payments perspective, people are using open banking at the moment to move money from one account to a next. They don't know it's open banking. Mm-hmm. But if they're faced with a checkout page where either they're asked to do something that looks different, which is either click a link, which then opens up their bank, a bit like HMRC, for example, they introduced open banking as a settlement method for self-assessment this year. And I know that what they perceive they might get compared to what they have received is miles apart. They've had billions of pounds worth of payments made. So the ability to show someone something that looks easy and simple, as in pay by bank, once somebody's done it once, they tend to find it's a really seamless process. And but this is a journey that will take many years, and it will require a lot of the very big, high volume operators to implement that payment widget on their website until everybody starts to become very, very familiar and see the benefits. But I'm sure we'll discuss more. But open banking for this particular sector, the gaming and gambling sector, has several areas that it kind of fits. One is the facilitation of payments. So for the gambling company, it's the ability to move money from one account to the next. It's slightly different across Europe than it is in the UK because of the payment rails. There's identity that open banking can provide you with, and there's also the affordability checks, which is becoming a hot topic to discuss. So, hence the William Hill press, which I'm sure you'll talk about as well in a minute. So there's an awful lot to do with open banking that's actually more than just payments.
Brittany, you mentioned the William Hill press release earlier.
I did. I brought my phone up here just so I would have that info to be able to share. So the William Hill Group businesses to pay record £19.2 million for failures. Those fall into two categories, one being social responsibility, but the other being what Christian opened part of that discussion with, being related to money laundering. And so an example to call out from this very long list of charges, just to go on the first one, was allowing customers to deposit large amounts without conducting appropriate checks. One customer was able to spend and lose $70,000 in a month. Another was able to spend and lose $36,000 in 4 days. So that idea of watching behavior, being able to see what the expected velocity is, being able to step in and fit in with the regulations and be in compliance over the course of various steps, but then also being able to separate out what is potentially, someone who's just putting themselves maybe at risk from overextending themselves via gambling, and separating that out from the born bad criminal intent of money laundering on the platform.
Okay.
I'd also love to throw out just a quick statement about user education, since that's something I used to do when I was a policy manager. And I really hope that everyone here in the room works somewhere where they have the attitude that it's okay to talk about fraud publicly, because I have worked at companies where, especially the marketing team, sorry to call them out, they think if we put anything public facing that acknowledges fraud, then people or the community will think that we inherently have fraud that is different from other platforms that don't talk about it. But I'm firmly in the belief that you need to be able to put the consumers in a place where they can defend themselves and advocate for themselves, whether that's by explaining that you will never call them on the phone or reach them via a certain method to ask them for their password, or just popping up some sort of notification or asking a question when all of a sudden they transfer a large amount of money off platform. Whatever you think is necessary to put as that small layer of friction can be very helpful to a consumer who otherwise might not have any resources or awareness that they're being asked to do something that is inherently, going to hurt them.
Okay, so the role of transparency then in comms, be upfront about it. We've got some questions coming in, and the last one actually makes me laugh. If a customer wants to lose 36 grand in 4 days, isn't that their business? Of course, yes. But as an industry, the only way this is going to continue to grow, surely, is if people can gamble in safe confines, a safer environment where there is someone putting in limits and checks for them. What do you?
I mean, if a customer wants to gamble away 36 or 57 or whatever amount of money, that's their business. If they own the money themselves, and if they don't have a gambling addiction problem, right? So if these two marks are checked, then yeah, sure, you can gamble whatever you want. That is your business. It's your money. If it's your money, and that's where exactly the crux comes in, and it's a bit more complicated than telling people we will never call you, right? We as the operator are obliged to make sure that we know it is indeed your money, right? And that's pretty much the most intrusive procedure that you can imagine, right? You've just spent lots of money on our platform, so you would think you are a big customer for us, and then we call you and want to know where does your money come from. And if you are legit, that's terrible, right? There's a company that asks you, can you please lay your books open and tell us where does your money come from? And they don't really care that we have to do this for preventing money laundering, that we should do this to make sure that they only play for what they can afford playing for. That's nice, but if they check these two boxes, it's a terrible intrusive procedure, and that's what I mean with the education piece, right? That's hard to get across.
Sure. Stephen, if money, you spoke about, money in, money out, money gets back into my account quicker, and then I go back on and spend it again and again. So does this sometimes, the open banking experience, could this lead to, turning someone's behavior habitual?
Again, a great question. I think the answer is it could. Open banking is never something that cures every problem. It's part of a bit of technology that can make life a bit better. But if you focus on specifically your question, with open banking, you can have access to a user's account and go back a year in transactional history. So as part of that onboarding or player assessment, you can have a very detailed overview of all of their income, all of their expenditure, movement of funds. I mean, it's literally every transaction that you've made. So you can have an extremely good picture. If somebody's always got £10,000 a month free at the end of the month, and they wish to set up an account with you as a gambling company saying, look, I want to spend £5,000 a month, you probably got enough information there to go, well, okay, that's fine. If you've got someone who's only got £500 a month free at the end of a month and they want to suddenly magic, have a 30 grand credit account, it's not going to work. So I think that the open banking data will provide the companies with more information to be able to put more processes in place. And it's just another way of getting access to this information. I also think if I was a gambler, which I'm not, I do like £10 a year on the Cheltenham races because I live there, which I did lose this year as well.
I hope you lost them with us.
Yeah, no, I don't know what I did actually. My wife said bet on something that was purple and yellow, and it didn't come in first. So, but if I've got, if you've got data that you can make good, sensible decisions with, then that's better. I also think that from a gambler, if I was somebody that was willingly consenting to having a company access my bank accounts and review my entire world so they could check whether I was good, bad, or indifferent, I think it would probably leave me with a different mindset as well, which is, okay, these guys are doing this well. They're checking because of laws, regulation, policies, whatever. So, quite often when people have to, open their kimono, as we say in money, it mentally puts a different, thinking with a person that might be looking to have a problem with gambling. So, and that's just affordability checks, really, which is a huge thing at the moment.
Okay. Let's take it. I can't even look down there because I can't see it. I can't read them. So behind us on the screen, we've got more questions coming in. So first one, a high-risk vertical. What issues are you facing with banking? Well, I think we've probably covered that from...
With banking itself?
That's the question, yeah.
That's the question.
Yeah.
Where to start? I think it strongly depends what market you're looking at. The UK is wonderful. The whole banking infrastructure is running on instant rails. Everything happens like right at the second. There's no risk literally to lose any money. That's amazing. As soon as you go over to continental Europe, it looks vastly different. There's still a lot of banks not connected to instant rails or not using instant rails or surcharging customers. They want to use instant rails. And that leaves open certain loopholes for for what we call unsettled bank transfers. So there is still a way to lose money based on bank transfers in Europe. So open banking is working on top of that infrastructure, and the safety and the customer satisfaction based on it being instant or not is not something that open banking solves for you. It's what the local banks do or do not solve for us. So I think that's one thing. And then it depends a bit. You have markets like Germany where paying with your bank was a thing for a long time. So people are very accustomed to this. So a lot of people do pay with their bank. When we first started using open banking in the UK, it was rather unknown, the whole procedure, the SCA signing off, logging in, and so on. So it took some time, but even there, over the last 2.5 years, we now see like 20 to 30% of our money being deposited into player balances using banking. So you need to educate customers a bit.
Sure. Okay. There is a question here about identity, and will the European identity wallet help? And I wonder actually if that will help with those kind of cross-border, when people are traveling, and you've obviously done KYC and having this wallet in place. What are the thoughts around identity and specifically a European wallet?
I don't think it will help. The thing is that, at least I can only talk for the gambling industry, it's pretty fragmented when it comes to the regulation. So as long as not every single regulator of every single market would agree on that they are fine basing identity on that wallet, it doesn't help at all. So again, legislation plays a big role here.
Okay, Armin, you're nodding away.
I think it's a really good point in the sense where why do banks issue cards? Because it provides a very easy and convenient mean to have global acceptance. They know that it's accepted wherever you are. And Dave said it very nicely this morning where, he doesn't have to worry. He takes Apple Pay out and pays, and he doesn't have to think about it. So this is the reason why the banks are using those cards and the card rails that are behind it, because of that global acceptance side. And when you look at the electronic identity, then how do you route back to the certificate authority, which is fragmented at the moment? So it is a situation, it is interesting, but at the moment it doesn't have the global acceptance or the maturity level that would be necessary in order to enable those cross-border discussions.
Okay. Is instant payments a good thing for potentially a fraud-prone industry, and what can be done to ensure open banking is safe for gaming and gambling? I mean, we've kind of covered that in terms of, the data, the transparency, and being able to share more information. But any other comment on that?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, there has to be some reliance on the fact that if the checks are done correctly, and again, when it comes to checking an individual, there's a huge amount, as you guys know yourself, from doing one check up to that picture that Brittany showed of the guy with the passport. That's one check. But if that was part of 20 other checks where you could plug into other validation of credentials, you end up with something that's secure. Now, a bank does go through that process, to most of our knowledge, to onboard somebody with a very high degree of a high degree of certainty that person is who that person is. So if that person is making a transaction from that account, you like to think it is that person. However, I'm also very happy to sit on a panel about open banking fraud because it exists. There are fraud in open banking payments. It's very minor, but it exists. And as Brittany knows full well, whenever there's a system that's new or better or different, there are fraudsters trying to trick a system. So again, it's all about multiple points of failure, multiple checks that you need to put in place to make sure it's as good as you want it to be.
And I think you mentioned something that is very relevant. It's on the data element. So one of the things that we added, especially in the gaming industry, is when you see that a lot of the kids are using the parents' cards as well. The gathering of the information and the transparency of that information with the notifications that are being made are very important. And when we look at the evolution of the EMV 3D Secure, in the first iteration, it had to go through the issuing bank's notification to enable the transaction. That was creating friction on one side. It interrupted the experience on the other side, and it's something that was not familiar. What we introduced into the specification is all these elements and the data that is useful in order to validate the transaction. Cryptogram that goes with it, with the device information that is attached to it, that allows the issuer to validate, okay, this is a real card, this is a real person using it, and I have validated the cryptogram, so okay, I authorize the transaction. And I see another question on the tokenization side that is also helping the approval rates. Instead of using the card number, using the tokenization, it's increasing the approval rates of the transaction being accepted on the other side. So the combination of the two is actually very powerful in enabling that frictionless, seamless, reducing fraud on one side, but not interrupting the gaming experience on the other side.
Sure. Okay. Brittany, do you have...
Oh, yeah. I could throw out some examples, some from my experience of just how quickly fraudsters do become aware of a new either payment method or otherwise a fraud vector on a website to take advantage of. At one point, one of the companies that I worked for, and they will remain nameless just because this example isn't them at their finest moment, decided to launch a new sort of pathway for payment on a Friday afternoon without having involved the trust and safety or fraud prevention team in any of that discussion. They just thought it'd be fun to throw it out, see what happens over the weekend, come back on Monday and see how it went. And so I got to draft and send the very fun email saying that my team would not be providing weekend coverage, nor would we take on any responsibility for fraud via that because we hadn't hooked it up to our fraud prevention system yet. It was all just completely, outside of the rails that we'd built. And it took about 2 hours before it was getting hit so hard with card testing that they had to have some people come back after work on Friday and turn it off and then reassess Monday morning. I've also seen a company that never really had much fraud chatter about them on the deep and dark web until, and you can mark it with the day that they announced they were IPOing. All of a sudden, there were discussions about them and accounts stolen from their users were available for sale because they saw that as something, hey, this company's going public, they must be doing well. How can we cash in? And then just as a last example there that is really connected to the payments world, we'll find that fraudsters, they're not aware of what processor a payment's going through, nor are they really concerned about it until that payments company offers a consumer-facing product. So, not to throw anybody under the bus by naming names, but I want to provide context to that example. But if you're a Stripe and they're more familiar with you, if you're a PayPal and there's a wallet functionality, that's generally when we'll see a shift of a payments company that's never really sort of dealt with that fraud or stolen account angle, all of a sudden having guides and having accounts for sale on the deep and dark web. So I can throw out those examples.
Excellent. Christian, I don't know if you're happy to address this very specific question here about thresholds at LeoVegas to trigger source of funds check. I don't know if that one's too specific for you.
That is very specific. I'm sorry, I'm not going to talk about our internal procedures here.
Yeah, no problem.
Speaking to you over there,
There's somebody taking notes.
Get the insights out too much here.
No problem. Okay, so definitely kind of a social angle coming through on some of these questions. And another one here about the gambling profits, the scale of this. And actually, if companies and governments, presumably, the UK takes £3 billion from gaming into their taxes. So are governments and organisations prepared to actually put in those affordability checks that could potentially reduce this size of the market?
So that is already happening. In some markets in Europe, that is already part of the regulation where we are obliged to do affordability checks on our customers. And obviously the technology that we have now with open banking helps a lot there with the ups and the downs. So that is already reality.
Okay. All right. So CBDCs, we've going to see this on lots of stages, I would imagine, over the course of this week. Is CBDC going to become the mechanism of choice for gaming and gambling?
That's a very broad question. Well, mechanism of choice to solve what? Sorry, I don't really know how to answer this. I think... for me personally, this the whole topic about CBDCs is a bit too far away. I think we're missing out the fact where are people getting their money from and how. And ultimately the customers will drive adoption based on how are they getting money. And of course, if all governments across Europe will adopt that technology, then and once we're getting paid in it, sure, it will make a difference. But until then, I think it's a bit too far away.
Too far out.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So I think that obviously we spoke about the differences between gaming and gambling. We've spoken about the need for regulatory change. Looking to the future, without talking about CBDC, we've got metaverse coming, over the horizon. We've also got AI from a consumer perspective. And Brittany, you spoke about AI from, machine learning and your platform and what your platform can aim to solve. How are you staying ahead of what might be coming along from a consumer and ChatGPT perspective?
Oh, well, we could go into that into a lot of detail, but to stay kind of on the topic of the monitoring that we do and actually seeing what fraudsters are discussing, there is an uptick now of them talking about how they could potentially leverage AI. I know everybody has said ChatGPT at some point or had that brought up in a presentation, but there's one particular fraudster who I like to monitor because he is very prolific. He is on TikTok, Twitter, Instagram, all of the different sites. He could care less. He's very public about what he does and has a big following. And he has been sharing examples of ways that he's tried to get ChatGPT to do prompts in order to convince people to turn over their credentials, their username or password or whatever information by pretending to be another entity, like a legitimate company. So we do see them leaning into those discussions. I've seen some who claim to be running groups where they have an AI that helps them identify matches that are most likely to win. I don't know how they're able to scrape that and what they're able to do. We see that come up in Telegram a lot. I don't know if that's something that maybe I can show Christian afterward, if that's something he hasn't peeked at. But we do see them making sort of claims about getting that advantage, again, with that shift from if you just take a stolen payment method or stolen funding source and then use that in order to gamble, there'll be checks that you have to pass. But if you come in just legitimate enough and you know that you can take on a certain level of risk because whatever this AI is made a promise to you about success rate, we are seeing that pop up more. Those, though, I haven't seen any kind of proof or any reports back on whether or not those are legit groups. So maybe next year we'll have a lot more examples to share. I hope not, but with the way that they develop, I'm sure we will.
Okay, all right. We'll take one more question from the floor here. So what we as gambling operators can do to get equal conditions from Google, Visa and MasterCard is you're not allowed to provide Google Pay except in the UK, France and Ireland, and not able to place gambling app in Google Play in the majority of countries. Does anyone understand that? Does anyone have a proper view on how to answer that question? I guess that, again, this is about the differences in markets, the differences in the payment wallet experiences from a standards perspective as well.
But I also think it's differences in how especially gambling is being seen. Obviously, when you talk about gambling, I mean, I noticed how quickly also people here on this panel, when we talk about gambling, say, "I don't gamble." So it is a hot topic, right? It's in some markets it's a very political topic. So what we do is not only seen as a business that is growing dramatically. So obviously there is a demand by the consumer, but it's also seen in a very emotional way. It's a very political way. There's traditionally there is a state-owned gambling, so it's a revenue stream for countries. So that's in some markets it's very sensitive. So I think where we need to shape up as gambling industry is we need to get better in how we lobby what we do with infrastructure providers, with banks, with legislation, but also with the likes like Visa, MasterCard, or I don't know, Google and Apple for the stores. I think that our friends at Visa and MasterCard, not sure if there are any here, hi, they make good money on gambling. I'm pretty sure that the rates that we are paying for acquiring are a lot higher than the rates that, I don't know, Zalando is paying for their acquiring. So they're making very good money on this industry, but there's not a lot of support from them for this industry when it comes to specific use cases. So we're talking a bit about fraud on this panel as well in relation to that industry, and simple things like us wanting to establish the person that is now paying. Can we find ways to establish, is that person paying with their card? We have information about that person according to the sign up and verified identity and so on. But how can we make sure that you're not paying with your mom's card or with a stolen card, right? We can't even establish the name on the card. That's technically not possible on the schemes today. In some markets, we have that as a regulatory requirement. And we cannot satisfy it because neither Visa nor MasterCard are helping us in that way. And there's no really open dialogue that we as an industry have with Visa and MasterCard. So we are being a bit neglected, even though we're making them very good money. And that's something where I think I don't want to blame the schemes. I think we as the gambling industry need to shape up in the way that we in the shape of trade unions and the likes approach the infrastructure providers that we have and that we are reliant on.
Yeah. Okay. So there's a definite call to action there for the industry to work more closely with these providers. Also, from a standards perspective, I think when we had our briefing call, that was very, very clear that from your perspective, Christian, that the need to work together and communicate more effectively for a common goal, which is ultimately to grow this sector, but to do it in a privacy, trust, respectful way that is going to, meet our societal goals as well.
Exactly, yeah.
Okay.
In that collaboration, I think it's a very important aspect because we work together with W3C that does all the standards for the web related activities. And then we have FIDO on the authenticators. So we have created jointly the Web Payment Security Interest Group, which has a lot of inputs from the different industry stakeholders. And in that area, we know that we can't move the needle on our own. But through the integration of the different standards and technologies, then we can bring this convenience to the consumer together. And that includes changes that you implement on the browser, the fact that you can actually capture the consumer's credentials through the authenticator. So if you have a fingerprint reader on your laptop, you can use that. That's passed on to the bank that says, okay, I approve the transaction. So these are really easy to understand examples on how you enable that seamless experience by integrating the different technologies together.
So actually, I mean, a lot of this stuff when we opened, we spoke about consumer appetites changing, we spoke about technology changes, and we spoke about regulation as being the three sort of main pillars for the opportunity to grow this market. And those building blocks are there, but it's a case of joining them up where possible and communicating in the interest of the consumer. Okay, all right. Any closing remarks from anyone before we wrap
I think
up?
I'd just like to keep the open banking thing, I think just a point of great simplicity. If somebody's adding a pay by bank button on a gaming, gambling, any kind of site, the reality of the process is somebody would click that. It would then open up their account. They select their account using their own biometrics. They make the payment. And especially in the UK, the money transfers from that person's bank to the recipient's bank in a matter of seconds. And there are no chargebacks. It's a push payment consented from the security of the bank app, and the cost compared to the card networks that Christian would refer to, we're talking pence. If you're doing lots of high volumes, you can get an open banking payment to cost you, let's say, 2-3p. So when you compare that is just in its own right, while we're at a payments conference, that's why that little part of open banking really makes a difference.
But hit the nail on the head. You spoke then very specifically about the UK, which comes back round to where Christian opened. Brittany, any final remarks from yourself?
I think I want to call back to the idea of identity verification very briefly and just share a phrase that I'll bring up often, which is you need to make sure that you are not just verifying an identity, but you are verifying the identity. It is too easy to say, yes, this is a real name, this really matches this birth date, but it's actually not the individual behind the account. Escalated up to the point of we'll see people who are, basically being used as mules, similar to people who would go into an Apple store and open 5 phone lines and buy 5 shiny new iPhones to then hand to somebody outside of the store for a small payment. We'll see people who are willing to open new accounts and go through KYC checks on gaming and gambling platforms. But just because they are the ones who are then taking that action and using their identity to complete that doesn't mean they're the ones who are then going to step in and continue to use that account. So we really need to keep in focus at all times who is the person within this account taking this action.
Okay. All right. Super. Well, thank you very much for all the comments. Thank you, Brittany, for your presentation to begin with. And thank you to the audience for the questions. Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in to the official MPE podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe to the show and check other video interviews with other industry leaders on our YouTube channel. For more content, follow Merchant Payments Ecosystem on LinkedIn and Twitter. Don't miss out on our Positivity magazine and remember to subscribe to the MPE newsletter at www.merchantpaymentsecosystem.com.